We live in a culture that is increasingly obsessed with the concept of early acceleration. From the moment a child is born, there is a subtle, pervasive pressure that whispers to parents, if they aren't ahead, they are already behind. We see flashcards designed for infants, reading programs for toddlers, and a race to memorize the alphabet before a child is even out of diapers. We have convinced ourselves that the brain is like a hard drive, and the goal of parenting is to fill it with data BCs, 123s, colors, and shapes as quickly as possible. But here at the Kids Growth Lab, we approach this differently. We look at the neuroscience of how a human being actually develops, and the biology tells us a completely different story. Before your child turns 5, academic drills are not the foundation of success. In fact, prioritizing them at the expense of other developmental needs can actually work against the brain's natural architecture. What your child needs before age 5 is something far more powerful than early literacy or mathematical memorization. They need a foundation that determines their emotional resilience, their capacity for deep focus, the quality of their future relationships, and even the physical wiring of their prefrontal cortex. If you focus on this one critical area before age 5, school will eventually be easy, friendships will feel natural, resilience will be their superpower. Stay with me, because what I am about to share requires a paradigm shift, requires us to move away from looking at children as test takers in training, and start seeing them as complex, developing nervous systems seeking connection. Let's begin by dismantling the myth we were sold. We have been led to believe that early academic achievement is the greatest predictor of future success. Parents often think, if my 3-year-old can recite the alphabet, they are a genius. However, research analyzed by the Kids Growth Lab reveals that early academic acceleration does not guarantee long-term advantage. While a child who is drilled with flashcards might read slightly earlier, studies show that by 3rd grade that advantage usually evaporates. And in some cases, those children experience higher levels of anxiety and a lower intrinsic love for learning. Why? Because the brain is built from the bottom up. You cannot build the roof of a house before you have poured the foundation. The roof represents higher-order thinking, logic, reading, and math functions of the cortex. The foundation is the brainstem and the limbic system, the centers responsible for safety, emotion, and connection. When we force a child to operate from their cortex before their limbic system feels secure, we create a fragile structure. We create children who can perform but who cannot cope. The true foundation of a child's brain is not academics, it is integration and connection. A child who develops emotional and relational security early shows significantly higher intelligence later in life because their energy is not being wasted on anxiety or survival mechanisms. They cope better with failure because they have an internal sense of worth that is untied to performance. Here at the Kids Growth Lab, we want you to understand that the brain prioritizes survival over learning. Every single time. If a child, this nervous system detects stress perhaps from the pressure to perform or a lack of emotional attunement, the thinking part of the brain. The prefrontal cortex literally goes offline. Therefore, a calm, connected nervous system is infinitely more valuable than a child who can mechanically recite the ABCs. We are not just raising students, we are growing humans. And humans run on connection, not just information. So if we aren't focusing on flashcards, what should we be building? What does the brain actually hunger for during these critical first 5 years? If you want to give your child the ultimate competitive advantage, you must give them 3 things: emotional safety, responsive love, and unstructured play. These are not nice-to-haves, they're biological imperatives. Here at the Kids Growth Lab, we describe this as building healthy brain architecture. Every interaction you have with your child is physically shaping the neural pathways of their mind. Before a child can learn phonics, which is a cognitive skill, they must internalize a deep somatic truth. I am safe. I am seen. I am loved. Before they can solve complex equations, they need to solve the fundamental equation of human existence. Is my world predictable? Can I trust the people around me to soothe me when I am distressed? Let us look at this through the lens of what we call serve and return interactions. Imagine a game of tennis. Your baby smiles the serve, and you smile back the return. Your toddler points at a bird, the serve, and you say, "Yes, that's a big blue bird," the return. Data from the Kids Growth Lab confirms that these simple responsive interactions literally build the wiring of the brain. When you respond to your child, Needs, whether it's a cry for comfort or a bid for play, you are releasing neurochemicals, like oxytocin and opioids in their brain that promote growth and calmness. You are myelinating their nerves, making their brain faster and more efficient. Conversely, when we ignore these cues to force an academic activity, we flood their system with cortisol, the stress hormone, which is toxic to the developing architecture of the brain. Furthermore, we must talk about the serious business of play. In our modern society, we often view play as a waste of time, something children do when they aren't learning. But from a neurobiological perspective, play is learning in its highest form. The Kids Growth Lab has highlighted that play is the primary engine of development for the prefrontal cortex, the CEO of the brain. When children engage in deep pretend play-building forts, making mud pies, role-playing with dolls, they are practicing impulse control, emotional regulation, and abstract thinking. A worksheet can teach a child to identify the letter A. But play teaches a child how to negotiate rules, how to handle frustration when the block tower falls, and how to hold an idea in their mind. These are executive function skills, and they are far better predictors of life success than IQ. When a child plays, they are integrating their sensory experiences with their emotions and their logic. They are building a whole brain. So, the most educational toy you can give a child isn't a tablet with a learning app. It's a cardboard box, a set of wooden blocks, or a pile of sand. We need to trust the developmental wisdom of the child. They play because their brain is demanding the specific stimulation it needs to grow. How do we translate this science into your daily life? How do you parent in a way that prioritizes this connection? It begins with shifting from being a manager of your child's behavior to being a steward of their internal world. Here are 5 practical ways to apply the Kids Growth Lab methodology. First, prioritize emotional safety over behavioral compliance. When your child is melting down, instead of saying, "Stop crying, it's not a big deal," which invalidates their reality, try saying, "I hear you. You are really frustrated right now. I am here with you." This is a technique we call name it to tame it. When you help a child label their emotion, you soothe the amygdala, the brain's alarm center, and help the logic center come back online. This builds emotional intelligence, which is the #1 predictor of future leadership and relationship satisfaction. Second, encourage deep, useless play. Swap the worksheets for blocks, free outdoor exploration, and pretend kitchens. Let them be bored because boredom is the birthplace of creativity. Third, speak to their identity, not their performance. This is crucial for developing a growth mindset. Instead of saying, "You're so smart," which makes them fear making mistakes that might disprove that label, say you work so hard on that. Look how you figured out that problem. One builds a fragile ego, the other builds resilience and grit. Fourth, narrate their world to build language naturally. You don't need flashcards to teach vocabulary. You just need to talk. Mommy is washing the red cup. Oh, the water feels warm. Now we are drying it with the towel. This activates the auditory processing centers and connects language to real-life experience, which is how deep learning happens. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, slow down. The Kids Growth Lab emphasizes that a rushed child is a stressed child. Your child doesn't need a schedule packed with soccer, piano, and coding classes before age 5. They need presence. A recent analysis by the Kids Growth Lab showed that children who grow up with slow esteem of higher self-esteem and better mental health. This brings us to the golden takeaway. The goal of the first 5 years is not to create a smart child, but to create a secure child. You do not need to force learning. You need to water the roots. Imagine your child as a plant. You cannot pull on the stem to make it grow faster. You will only uproot it. You must tend to the soil. The soil is your relationship. When a child feels safe, seen, heard, loved, and free to play, the brain unlocks. It moves out of survival mode and into growth mode. Learning becomes effortless. Confidence becomes natural. And yes, they will learn their ABCs and 123s, but they will do it with joy and curiosity rather than anxiety. So, say this to yourself today: I am not raising a test score. I am raising a human being. Your child doesn't need the perfect parent who has all the right educational toys. They need a connected parent who is willing to get down on the floor, look them in the eye, and let them know that they are delightful just as they are. That is the ultimate brain-building strategy.